I'm Nichelle Carpenter. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Labor and Employment Relations and the psychology department. My research focuses on the measurement of work performance behaviors. First, this includes evaluating whether we should ask an employee to tell us about how well they're performing, or whether we can also just ask the supervisors and coworkers. Generally, my research is aimed to bring more clarity to our understanding of different work performance behaviors. The project that I'm focusing on today is a project on leadership, and specifically looking at the measurement of leadership behaviors. This is a project that I conducted with Angela Lee, who's a doctoral student in the psychology department. Essentially, we wanted to look at whether there's a difference between the leader's perception. We really wanted to look at whether a leader's view of their leadership matches some of the observers that they are likely to interact with. My co-author and I conducted a meta-analysis of the leadership literature. And so what that means is that we collected all of the studies that had been done that included a leader's perception of their leadership behaviors, as well as any type of observer in that same study. And so we were able to locate 61 studies that included leadership ratings along with some type of observer. And so what we did was we recorded the correlation between the leader's perception and the observer's perception, and then we're able to provide an overall average across those 61 studies to provide more of a summary of how related those types of the leader and observer perceptions tend to be. Generally, what we found was that the relationship or correlation between leader ratings or leader perceptions and observer perceptions was only around 0.3. So while that does indicate a positive relationship between leader perceptions and observer perceptions, it's still very far from a perfect relationship. So what that means is that there is some overlap between what a leadership perceives their leadership capabilities to be and what the observer perceives as well, but there's a lot of uniqueness and non-overlapping information contained. Something else that was interesting that we found was the whole reason for conducting this study was that we anticipated that different observers would have different perceptions of the leader's behavior, and that perhaps this correlation would depend on who the observer was. One of the implications is that we shouldn't treat these leader and observer ratings as interchangeable. There's a lot of uniqueness in these perceptions, and that we need to do more to figure out what's in that black box of a leader's rating versus an observer rating. One thing that I'm interested in pursuing in the future is how do these relationships change over time? The relationships that we were able to capture in the study are more like a snapshot. So it was one measurement of the leader's perception and the observer's perception at one point in time. And it would be interesting to examine whether, if a leader gets feedback on how much their ratings converged with their subordinates, whether over time they gradually meet and become more congruent with each other. We were kind of limited by the studies that we had and the information that was reported in the studies. So we don't have, we don't have a conclusion of which source is better, but we know that they're different. And so fundamentally, we shouldn't regard all these different rating sources as interchangeable or equivalent measures of leadership.